Welcome to our latest HKEX ESG Academy seminar, Navigating Climate-Related Disclosures. The event is about to begin. A few housekeeping reminders. The event will be conducted in English with simultaneous interpretation in Putonghua. You can select your preferred language at the top right-hand corner of your screen. You will also see the agenda and Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen. The agenda tab has more information on today's program and our speaker profiles. The Q&A tab allows you to submit written questions during panel discussion. Thank you. Come on. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our latest HKEX ESG Academy seminar, Navigating Climate-Related Disclosures. This is Natalie from HKEX. It's my pleasure to be your MC today. Global institutions, regulators, and market participants have been working together to enhance and standardize climate-related disclosures worldwide. At HKEX, we are playing an active role in supporting the journey to enhance the availability and quality of the climate-related data in Hong Kong and beyond. Today, we're delighted to have industry experts with us to discuss current and emerging climate-related disclosures requirements and take a closer look at how corporates can enhance their climate-related disclosures as they pursue their low-carbon goals. To kick off today's program, I would like to invite Ms. Catherine Ng, Head of Listing at HKEX, to the stage to deliver the welcome remarks. Catherine, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to especially thank our guest speakers and panelists, Teresa, Jill, John, and Jonathan, for coming today. And I'm looking forward to the presentation and discussions ahead. Last month, the ISSB published its inaugural sustainability standards. The new set of global standards aims to create a common language for many aspects of sustainability disclosure, including the effect of a company's climate-related risks and opportunities. But how will these standards impact Hong Kong-listed companies and other Hong Kong market practitioners? How can you make sure that you are ready for the climate-related disclosure requirements on the horizon? We've organized today's event to help you answer these questions. As a market operator and frontline regulator of 2,600 companies, Hong Kong EX has a responsibility and role to play in supporting the global sustainability agenda by promoting transparency, standardization, and education. By transparency, we mean the effort to continuously improve the availability and quality of ESG data in our markets. And by standardization, we mean the effort to harmonize our ESG framework with the best of the different sets of protocols and requirements on ESG reporting around the world. Since we first introduced ESG reporting more than 10 years ago, to the introduction of TCFD elements into our regulatory framework in 2020, we've been continuously promoting transparency and standardization, while being conscious of the unique characteristics and ESG development stage of the Hong Kong market. The newly published ISSB standards reflect the rapid pace at which the global response to investor demand for better climate-related disclosure is growing. At HKEX, we're committed to making sure our markets match this pace. In April, we launched a consultation on proposed enhancement to our framework that referenced the ISSB standards. We expect the results of the consultation to be implemented as early as January 2024. In fact, the consultation closes this Friday. If you're interested, if you read that, please send in your submissions. These proposed enhancements will not only help our issuers achieve greater climate-related risk management, but also strengthen their resilience and enhance the long-term sustainability of Hong Kong's markets. Just a moment ago, I mentioned education. We are also committed to ensuring our community of listed issuers have the guidance they need to promote the best ESG practices, and that's what brings us here today. Since 2021, our ESG Academy has been providing a one-stop platform for educational content on ESG, and it includes a series of events such as this one, where we bring together leading experts to share insights and experiences that will help Hong Kong corporates drive their own sustainability journeys. Today, we're delighted to have 𝗙ecie𝗹𝗹liche of the IFRS Foundation. 𝗙cie will give you a better understanding of the ISSB's new standard on global sustainability disclosure. My colleague Kelly will shed light on the enhancement we are proposing on the HKEX ESG guidance and appendix. And you will get insights into the first-hand experiences of other listed companies in preparing for climate-related disclosure from our panel of speakers. They present a variety of sectors, including transport, property development, and finance. All around the globe, the call for action on climate change has become louder and more urgent, and people are increasingly looking to businesses to reflect and drive the changes they expect to see. But the low-carbon transition won't happen overnight. It involves a journey. The enhancement we are proposing to our framework will help Hong Kong corporates on their sustainability journeys, and their journeys will drive the journeys of their customers, suppliers, and partners. I hope today's presentations and discussions will make your journey easier. Please enjoy the event, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Catherine. The International Sustainability Standards Board, ISSB, has recently published its inaugural standards, and today it gives us great pleasure to welcome Ms. 𝗙ecie𝗹𝗹liche, the co-vice chair of IFRS Foundation, the corporate partner and China chairman of Fresh Risk by 𝗙cie𝗹𝗹liche, to the stage. She will talk about ISSB's efforts in developing a globally consistent and reliable sustainability reporting framework. 𝗙cie, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Instead of jumping right into the how, let me start with why ISSB. ISSB was created to solve a global problem. Now, I know we have plenty of global problems. This particular global problem is the lack of a globally comparable, consistent understanding of how sustainability information, like climate change, affects companies' prospects. We all know that sustainability considerations have now become an integrated part of investment decision-making. So ISSB's mission is to create a set of standards so that companies provide sustainability-related information alongside financial statements in the same reporting package. I mentioned climate change, which we can all see is real. Record high temperatures are being broken around the world again and again. So ISSB is starting with climate as its most urgent, but it will not be climate only. So why the IFRS Foundation? because IFRS Foundation created in the last 20 years a global accounting language, the IFRS accounting standards, which is now used by more than 140 jurisdictions around the world, including in Hong Kong. So IFRS Foundation has the experience, the track record, the reputation, and the global reach to tackle this global problem. IFRS Foundation didn't ask to do it. It has actually become my night job, and I wasn't actually signing up for it in the first place when I joined. It has been a demand-led process, which has been strongly supported by the G20, the G7, the Financial Stability Board, and IOSCO, whose membership comprises 95% of the world's securities regulator, including the SFC in Hong Kong, the SEC in the US, and the MOF in China, as well as many, many business leaders and investment communities around the world. 2 weeks ago, the IFRS Foundation opened a new office in Beijing to add to the multi-location presence of ISSB and to execute ISSB's strategy and capacity building for emerging economies and SMEs in Asia. It was a very exciting moment. I took this photo. So it is not surprising that when ISSB's inaugural set of 2 global standards, the General Requirement, S1, and Climate-Related Disclosure, S2, were published on 26th of June, it was described as historic, a landmark, a milestone. I called it a tipping point. For the first time, we have a common language which can be used in conjunction with our financial statements to understand the effect of climate-related risks and opportunities on companies' prospects in the short, medium, and long term. This is a tremendous breakthrough. Not only is ISSB creating a common language, but a comprehensive sustainability-related disclosure standard. And this standard is suitable for application around the world. Even if you use US GAAP, you can still apply it, creating a truly global baseline. I happened to be in London on that Monday and watched the bell being rung at the London Stock Exchange to mark the occasion, hence this photo. S1 and S2 didn't start from scratch. From the get-go, ISSB's goal is not to compete with other disclosure standards or frameworks. ISSB's goal is to simplify the chaotic reporting landscape, and we are extremely proud to say that the IFRS Foundation has, in a very short period of time, consolidated leading standard setters, namely CDSB, SASB, and integrated reporting. And this Monday, the IFRS Foundation announced that they will be taking over the monitoring of the progress on companies' climate-related disclosures from TCFD, as requested by the Financial Stability Board. What is important for us is to eliminate duplicative reporting and to report what investors really want to see to facilitate investment decision, pricing of risks, and capital allocation. Now, I've come to realize that standard setting is actually a huge amount of work. In the last 18 months, ISSB has been working furiously to deliver S1 and S2. In addition to 1,400 sets of comments on the exposure drafts published in March last year, there were over 400 outreach events. As you know, there are only 240 working days in a year, not counting public holiday. The staff published 36 papers, which are all available on the IFRS Foundation website, and there were 10 public meetings with the ISSB board to re-deliberate comments from the exposure drafts. And we also had feedback from strategic, advisory, consultative, jurisdictional, and technical committees, forums, and groups to ensure that the IFRS Foundation listens to, interacts with, and engages with stakeholders. Now, let me say a few words on S1. S1 is the sustainability mirror of ISA1. Accountants among you will know that this is the presentation of financial statements. So we wanted an equivalent to show how sustainability information should be presented in corporate disclosure. S1 fully incorporates the TCFD disclosure architecture, and the TCFD recommendations are now compulsory disclosure, as you may know, in the UK, New Zealand, and Singapore in relation to certain industries. Hong Kong proposes to mandate TCFD-aligned disclosures for ESG reports, so the direction of travel is clear. The basic requirement of S1 is that it requires disclosure of not any, but material information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunity in the short, medium, and long term. What does that mean? This means that all material risks, but also opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the company's cash flow, access to finance, cost of capital, or the company's prospects need to be disclosed. Now, the good news is that materiality has the same definition as in the accounting standards, so there is alignment. And I hope you can see the close linkage with financial disclosure, and this is very important. If there is one point I want all of you to take away from my talk, my speech, it is the integration of sustainability reporting with financial reporting. That will be the transformational change going forward. What's more, these globally comparable sustainability-related disclosures have the potential to move market prices. So where do you put this disclosure? S1 makes it very clear that you can include them in your company's management commentary, management report, MD&A, operating and financial review, integrated report, or strategic report, subject to any legal or regulatory requirements in any particular jurisdiction or territory. Don't just bury it or obscure it. S1 do not require you to disclose absolutely everything. It is very clear that if your sustainability-related risks and opportunities could not reasonably be expected to affect a company's prospect, there is no need to disclose it. Now, let me turn to S2, climate-related disclosure. S2 has to be used in accordance with S1. This is a very important point. The two works as a pair. You can't call yourself to be ISSB compliant, as many corporates and global corporates will soon want to do that, unless you comply with the requirements in S1 and S2. Now, S2 is climate-specific and requires disclosure of material information about climate-related risks and opportunities. Again, it incorporates TCFD recommendations. Now, let me turn to one example, because there's not enough time to go into details, but let me give you one example and walk you through one example. S2 asks for climate-related cross-industry matrix, and a company will need to disclose in addition to Scope 1, 2, and 3. And we all know that Scope 3 is coming, and Scope 3 is required in the EU, and expected to be required in the US, and ISSB requires Scope 3. And you will need to disclose the amount and percentage of assets or business activities vulnerable to climate-related transition risk, climate-related physical risk, climate-related opportunities, and the amount of capital expenditure, financing or investment deployed towards climate-related risks and opportunities, as well as internal carbon prices, and the percentage of executive management remuneration linked to climate-related considerations. I know, it all seems a lot of work to have to work this all out and disclose all this. But ISSB is mindful of proportionality, skills, capabilities, and resources available to do all this disclosure work. And they've made it very clear that in preparing disclosures to meet these requirements, a company shall use all reasonable and supportable information that is available to the company at the reporting date without undue cost and effort. okay? So they are sympathetic that this is a journey and you can only do as much as you can with the resources available without undue cost and effort. But data and assumptions should, to the extent possible, be consistent with those used in your financial statements. And there are also transitional relief in relation to Scope 3, no disclosure on Scope 3 in the first accounting period in which the company uses ISSB standards. Now, if your company's activities include asset management, commercial banking, or insurance, Scope 3 emission is extended to cover what is known as financed emissions, i.e. emissions attributed to the loans, the investments made, and the underwriting of risk by these companies. Because this is a new language, IFRS Foundation has been trying to be very helpful. S1 and S2 comes with a package of guidance materials and illustrative examples. Check them out in their website. Now, ISSB can't do it all on its own and requires everyone's feedback, support, and participation. ISSB's job is to provide a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability-related disclosure through standards. IOSCO is currently independently assessing S1 and S2, and their endorsement will hopefully come out very soon. And this will be an important signal to its 95% of securities regulators around the world to adopt the standards in their territories or jurisdictions. Now, we have assurance to think about as well, and there is the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, the IASB, yes, they exist, and they are developing assurance standards to build confidence and trust in disclosures, and I'm sure we'll hear more from them very soon. Many jurisdictions are now actively going through their own legal and regulatory mechanism through public consultation, for example, in Hong Kong, to make S1 and S2 part of their requirements, and in a number of jurisdictions on a mandatory basis. Singapore and Australia have both issued consultation papers recently proposing to align ISSB disclosure standards, and Singapore and Australia are both proposing to apply them to non-listed but large companies as well. I'll come back to market participants at the end. I started by explaining our global problem due to lack of comparability. Now, the world's sustainability reporting is currently pretty chaotic and often described as an alphabet soup, riddled with greenwashing. More recently, I heard sustainability reporting described as a bowl of porridge, which I thought was brilliant, messy, thick, and not very tasty. In Cantonese, 真係一鑊粥. The actual output in terms of corporate disclosure is not always a pretty sight. I recently asked people what they thought of sustainability disclosure, and here are some of their comments. So there is an opportunity for us all in Hong Kong. If you're new to this, get familiar with the concepts of S1. Evaluate your internal systems and process to collect, aggregate, and validate sustainability-related data and information across your companies and your value chain. Think through your company's sustainability-related risks as well as opportunities and how they affect the company's financial position, financial performance, and cash flow in the short and medium and long term. Now, there's no definition as to what they mean, short, medium, and long term. You have to work it out and then probably create an industry norm. Review your company's reporting, identify gaps, and create a roadmap on how to plug them. Remember, sustainability has to be integrated into the day-to-day operation of the business of your company. Sustainability reporting is no longer a nice-to-have, no longer a standalone exercise. and definitely not just a compliance function. If you are already disclosing against TCFD and SASB, and I know some corporates already do that, or if you're familiar with TCFD, there is no need to wait. I encourage you to use S1 and S2 now that they are published. You can definitely disclose more on top of the global baseline, and some jurisdictions, like the EU, asks for more. ISSB is consulting on its future priorities beyond climate, so S1 and S2 are just the starting point. To maintain Hong Kong as an international financial center, we should be aligned with ISSB's global baseline of sustainability-related disclosure. I don't doubt that to do sustainability, it will involve a change of mindset, a change of behavior for a lot of people. There is always a lot of work to change what we normally do. Progress doesn't ever come without change. But we are humans and we are adaptable. Looking at our climate, when Beijing had its hottest day ever in June, we just had, and has been 40+ degrees every single day in July. We need to act to make sure there is something left, not only for our next generation, but for the generations to come. ISSB has now provided a pathway for companies to tell their stories on their sustainability journey and let investors use the information in a consistent and comparable way, price your company's shares, and facilitate capital allocation to transition economies to net zero. I encourage as many corporates as is possible to think forward, to use S1 and S2, and to take advantage of this global baseline of sustainability-related disclosure. And of course, to do their little bit for Hong Kong to maintain Hong Kong as an international financial center. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. For the next session, we are pleased to invite Ms. Kelly Lee, Senior Vice President of Policy and Secretariat Services of Listing Division at HKEX, to the stage. Kelly will talk about HKEX's proposed enhancements to the climate-related disclosures under the ESG reporting framework. Kelly, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Teresa, for the briefing on the new ISSB standards. And now I would like to dive deeper into our proposals to enhance climate disclosures. So this slide sets out the key developments in climate-related disclosure regulation. And Teresa has already covered the development of the ISSB and the new ISSB standards, so I will not repeat myself here. But one thing I'd just like to supplement is the local development in the Hong Kong context. Most of you may be aware that in 2020, all the financial regulators in Hong Kong have already came together to establish the Hong Kong Cross-Agency Steering Group. This is an initiative to coordinate all the Hong Kong policy efforts to support the development of Hong Kong as a green and sustainable finance hub. One of the objectives that's set by the Cross-Agency Steering Group is to mandate TCFD-aligned climate disclosures by 2025. In addition, in 2021, the Hong Kong government also announced its carbon neutrality target, as well as Climate Action Plan 2050. So, as Teresa mentioned, the direction is really, really clear. At HKEX, we have been focused on promoting ESG transparency and advocacy among our listed companies through our regulations, our rules, and market education. We have been adopting a progressive approach in the past 10 years. We started from a voluntary framework and moving towards mandatory ESG reports by all our listed companies. We gradually moved from a compliance thing to a ESG governance, gradually into integration of all these ESG considerations into the business, and now moving towards helping our companies to build the resilience. In July 2020, we have incorporated the key elements of the TCFD recommendations into our existing ESG requirements. All listed companies are required on a comply or explain basis to consider climate change issues and report on all the impacts on the company, as well as the actions taken to address these issues. Our listed companies are also required to set targets for certain environmental KPIs to monitor this progress. So, where are we? How are our companies doing? We have been observed a very good start. Generally, over 85% of our companies chose to disclose, to report on all these new climate disclosures requirements, despite the fact that these are only on a comply or explain basis. And our findings also reflected the increased awareness of the TCFD recommendations. Over 20% of our listed companies made reference to the TCFD recommendations or structured their disclosures around the TCFD recommendations. So all these findings reinforce our direction to further enhance climate disclosure requirements, which is the focus of our proposals. As a regulator, we need to make sure that our regulations remain fit for purpose and reflect our stakeholders' expectations. Through robust corporate governance and ESG regulations, we strengthen our position as the home to our trusted global fundraising venue of choice. Now we see the ISSB sustainability reporting standards come into place, which serve as the global baseline for reporting. So how HKEX can contribute to the development of the ecosystem. Our ESG framework has been in place for 10 years, covering both environmental and social issues. Our listed companies are very familiar with the existing requirements and all the reporting structure. So how we can utilize this existing framework while starting to build up the momentum for the adoption of ISSB standards in Hong Kong? The first step we've taken is to introduce climate reporting requirements into our listing rules, referencing the IFRS S2 standards, the climate standards. And our consultation paves the way towards adoption of the ISSB standards in Hong Kong, when the local standard setter and the local standards come into place and the market reaches the required maturity. It's against this backdrop that we launched our consultation in April. Under our proposals, we will upgrade the existing disclosure obligation of all the climate-related disclosures from current comply or explain basis to mandatory level. In addition, we also introduce new sets of requirements, climate-related disclosure requirements that are based on the new ISSB S2 climate standards. Recognizing the different levels of sophistication of our companies, we propose to allow interim provisions for certain disclosures, providing more flexibility to our companies to report on that is suitable for their own circumstances. As you can see here, our proposed new climate-related disclosures are categorized or structured around the four core pillars in accordance with the TCFD recommendations, namely governance, strategy, risk management, and matrix and targets. From the first glance of it, the long list may be quite overwhelming to some of our companies, so let's try to unpack it here. On the governance requirement, it's all about who. Under the existing ESG framework, all our listed companies are required to report on the board's governance and the oversight of all the ESG considerations. Climate-related risk is not separable from the other ESG risk issues. So what we see, the additional requirements that are proposing are only an extension of the existing requirements. On the second pillar, strategy, it's all about what. What will be the climate-related risks and opportunities that are impacting your company? What are the impacts to your company? What are the responses that your company will take or planning to take or have been taken to address all these risks and opportunities? It's all about the what. There are a few elements under this strategy pillar. And one thing we want to note is that in regarding disclosure around climate-related opportunities, under our proposals, disclosures about these climate-related opportunities are optional. We recognize that at this level, not that all our listed companies have identified these climate-related opportunities. And so we want to allow certain flexibility to our companies, and they can choose to make the disclosure where appropriate. So after identifying the climate-related risk affecting your company, the next logical disclosure is around how you articulate the changes that to your company's business model, strategy, and resource allocation in order to respond to all this risk. One important element in all your actions plan is regarding the targets. All these targets helps you to monitor and get your plan to help you evaluate the effectiveness of all your actions plan. These targets can be climate-related targets, which may include GHG emission targets that may be required under your local jurisdiction. And one thing to note is that where carbon credits are being used to achieve your GHG emission targets, under our proposals, we require listed companies to make additional information regarding the use of such carbon credits. The next element under the strategy pillar is climate resilience. It's about the information that enables your readers to understand your company's capacity to adjust your strategy, your business model, and operations to all these climate-related uncertainties. One of the tools that we required our listed companies to use in order to help you to do this assessment is climate-related scenario analysis. This is the hypothetical states of situations that can enable a tool that help the companies to predict different outcomes and then how your company can adjust your own business or strategy towards these different outcomes. The key about the use of climate-related scenario analysis is that it has to be commensurate with your company's circumstances. What means by that? It may involve your risk exposure towards climate-related risk, and also it can relate to your own skills, capacities, and also resources available. It is always a journey for the use of climate-related scenario analysis. So it's perfectly fine if you want to start for some of the less resourceful or for companies where your climate-related risk exposure is not that, is relatively low. Then you can start with more qualitative storylines. As the journey builds along and you gain more experience and you have devoted more resources towards getting the necessary knowledge or technical expertise, you may then progress towards more quantitative information or more technically sophisticated approach towards the use of your climate-related scenario analysis. Another element under the strategy pillar is the financial effects. That means is how all these climate-related risk and opportunities impacting your company's financial position, your financial performance, and cash flow. We have categorized the financial effects into two aspects, the current financial effects as well as the anticipated financial effects. Again, for these financial effects disclosure, we allow interim provisions to cater for different situations of the companies and for the different level of reporting levels. A key to take away for all these interim provisions is that the whole purpose of these interim provisions is we recognize that you may not be at the stage to make the full disclosure at this stage, but you always should have the work plan and a timetable towards full compliance with all these disclosure requirements. We want to make sure that it's always been on the board's agenda and always being under constant review and monitoring of all this progress in order for you to working towards the full compliance with all these disclosure requirements. You can't just sweep all these under your carpet at this moment, even if you can't do it at this stage. The third pillar, risk management. It is similar to the governance information that we required under the governance pillar. Since we have been introducing our ESG disclosure rules for 10 years, I trust that a lot of our listed companies already have in place a robust risk management system in regards to all these ESG risks. Again, so we are extending all these risk management disclosures to the climate-related risks, and is also an extension of what we are requiring at the moment. Last but not least, it's about the last pillar, matrix and targets. I think the one point to note is that we think the requirements on all this matrix, we are not asking for just a bunch of data which can be read in isolation. Instead, we think all these matrix and targets are some tools or illustration to your narratives or your discussions when you're talking about your commitment, your performance towards all this climate risk under the earlier 3 pillars that we mentioned about. In fact, these matrix and targets are something that you use to add color to your description of your commitment and your performance. It helps with your articulation to the stakeholders that reading your ESG reports. Under our current reporting requirements, we have already been requiring certain environmental KPIs under a comply or explain basis. Under our proposals, we will upgrade some of the current matrix, for example, Scope 1 and Scope 2 GHG emissions. And then we will also introduce a new set of matrix which will help you to illustrate your carbon-related commitments. One important matrix that we will introduce in our proposal is about Scope 3 emissions. Again, we recognize the difficulty around reporting on the Scope 3 emissions, including all those data availability, all those methodologies, knowledge is required. So we allowed interim disclosures around this area. Again, the key point is that you do need to have a work plan and to monitor your progress towards when you can fully comply with reporting on all these Scope 3 emissions. A very key point that companies should note is that you should kickstart the process and start going through your value chain to identify any activities that may involve significant emissions in your business operations. We also have proposed some cross-industry matrix. Again, all these link back ties in with all your description earlier about the impact of all this climate risk towards your business operations, your strategy, and we want to provide some matrix to help you to further illustrate that point. And regarding the use of internal carbon price, please note that this matrix is not mandatory. That means we are not requiring companies to set an internal carbon price for your business operation. But if you do have one, you need to make additional disclosures on that. So here are some tips for our companies that what you should do. Teresa has already shared with you some of the hows, which I fully echo what she said. I think I just want to highlight 2 additional points. The first one is the collaboration. It's not only something that your sustainability team or your company secretary team can perform when you come to all this climate reporting or sustainability reporting. It has to be involving all different levels of the company or different departments. It may be finance, it may be PR, it may be HR, it's every single department. So you have to get together. The next thing I want to highlight is all about stakeholder engagement. Especially in regards to Scope 3 emissions, you have to engage all the counterparties along your whole value chain in order to have the necessary information. And it's also your time to influence, to exert your influence over all these suppliers to move them towards the whole journey together. We are very much looking forward to wrapping up our markets feedback, which will be closing. Our market consultation will be closing by this Friday. So you definitely can play a part in shaping the rules, and your feedback is most welcome. And if you haven't done so, we strongly encourage you to file your feedback to us. So we definitely want to hear what you think about our proposals. And we will continue with our market educational efforts, including the publication of an implementation guidance together with our finalized rules, hopefully by the end of this year, in order to help our listed companies in understanding and compliance with our new rules. We want to ensure that you continue to get the best out of us and be part of a marketplace that you can be proud of. And without further ado, I shall pass the floor to our esteemed speakers for the upcoming panel discussion, which will provide you with some valuable insights into your own ESG journey. Please enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Now, we have a panel session looking at getting ready for climate-related disclosures, where our panelists will share their experience in preparing climate-related data and utilizing the standardized climate-related information in developing their climate strategy. In this panel, we will be joined by the following panelists: Ms. 𝗔𝗴𝗲, Legal and Governance Director at MTR Corporation Limited; Mr. John Hafner, Deputy Director of Sustainability at Hang Lung Properties; and Mr. Jonathan 𝗔𝗴𝗲, Head of Global Banking Sustainability of APAC at HSBC. With that, let's invite Kelly, our moderator, as well as our panelists, come to the stage. Throughout the panel discussion, please feel free to ask questions via the Q&A tab at the right-hand side of our event platform. Without further ado, Kelly, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all our esteemed speakers. I think Teresa also mentioned that the key to drive all these climate change or all these sustainability journey rests very much upon the board's involvement and also the board's buy-in. It involves the whole mindset change and also behavioral change from the top down. And I think maybe I will pose the first question to John. John leads, is the Deputy Director of Sustainability of Hang Lung Properties, and he's responsible for formulating the group-wide sustainability strategy and driving the execution within Hang Lung. And I noticed that Hang Lung has committed to reaching net zero emissions across the value chain by 2050. So John, could you please share with us how the board plays an important role in the decarbonization journey and your experience in getting the board's buy-in?
Sure. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. The first thing I would say is that just as net zero itself is a journey, engaging the board around net zero is also a journey. So I might share some thoughts from two perspectives. First, I'll give you a bit of a timeline, and then I'll talk about modes of interaction. So with respect to a timeline, I joined Hang Lung in October 2019, and the first thing we did was we refreshed our sustainability framework. So I report to the vice chair, so we have a board member who's already quite engaged on sustainability by design. And we spoke with our vice chair and CEO about our priorities. We refreshed our priorities, one of which was climate resilience. And we got board endorsement for our priorities. Then based on those priorities, we developed 2030 targets, including around climate resilience. And we had an ambitious target for greenhouse gas intensity reduction, 70% reduction relative to 2018. And that was in September 2020. I have to say our boards, we have two boards meeting together for both the group and the property level. There were some questions about the ambition of that target, but in the end, they endorsed it. And then shortly thereafter, the central government announced its commitment to carbon neutrality, and then Hong Kong announced its commitment. And we felt somewhat vindicated, and we felt we had wind at our sails in terms of policy direction. Subsequent to that, we had further engagement. We developed a set of 2025 targets, again, including decarbonization. And we started the journey of preparing for Science-Based Target Initiative validation, and we are validated against the Science-Based Target Initiative's net zero standard. But to do that, there were a series of interactions with our board. So we had, not only do I report to the boards directly 2 or 3 times a year, we actually had separate sessions with our board members around climate science, climate policy, business. And so the idea of making this commitment was not treated lightly. And we really framed the planning discussion around the science and what the science is requiring, what that means for business. So really it was a series of engagements at the board level through formal meetings, but also more informal meetings, through our executive board members, also in meetings with some of our independent board members. Just a very quick anecdote, we had a meeting with an energy efficiency expert who's interested in the business case for energy efficiency, along with an independent board member who has a particular interest in the subject. So it's not always through the formal mechanisms, but also informal meetings that can provide reinforcement for the board's cultural understanding. Now, once we have these targets endorsed, the value is that our employees understand that it's a board level endorsement. So the targets that we need to deliver on come from the top and come with that support from the top, and that therefore provides more space and momentum for people to take the target seriously.
Yeah, I think you're very lucky to have that board involvement, and also how it's a good demonstration of how the culture can permeate through all the different levels within the organization. Yeah, so maybe I'll next turn to Jill. So Jill is the MTR's Legal and Governance Director, and in her role, one of the duty is to oversee the risk management functions. So I will have a question on the around the risk management. So Jill, can you please share with us like how the climate-related risk and opportunities have been considered in your board's discussion, and how it's being integrated in the overall risk management system or framework within MTR?
Sure, thank you, Kelly. So we've been producing sustainability reports at MTR for over 20 years now. And so we've been carrying out over that time materiality assessments. And we have a really close link when we carry out those materiality assessments between our ESG strategy and our risk management approach. So our materiality matrix is fairly basic, but it really looks at how much of a risk a particular issue is to MTR and how much our shareholders care about it. Now, you might say, well, what about the opportunities piece? Because when 𝗙ecie was talking about the new standards and you were talking about the enhancements to Appendix 27, we're supposed to be looking at climate-related risks and opportunities. And for some of our businesses globally, such as in Sweden, actually climate does pose a real opportunity. So there's a movement in Europe called Flying Shame, which is trying to encourage people that for journeys that perhaps take less than 5 hours, you take ground-based public transport as opposed to flying. But I think here in Hong Kong, it's a pretty saturated market already. And so we're unlikely to be getting more people to travel on the MTR as a result of our approach to climate change. So we integrate climate-related risks and opportunities into our overall risk management framework. And the governance structure we have in place behind that is an executive-level enterprise risk committee, which is chaired by me. And we have representatives on that committee from all of our corporate functions and business units. And the role of that committee is really to make sure that we've identified our key corporate risks, that we're focused on emerging risk areas for the corporation. And we also try and ensure that the controls that we've put in place to mitigate those risks are effective. That committee then reports up to the executive, and at the board level, we have 2 committees that are really involved in overseeing climate-related risks. The first is our Audit and Risk Committee, and they look at our overall risk management framework, and to assess whether or not that's effective, they also receive regular reports on our top risk areas. But then secondly, we have an Environmental and Social Responsibility Committee at our board, and that really looks at ESG from a more strategic level. So when, for example, we were setting our new ESG strategy, when we were identifying our 3 key focus areas, and importantly, when one of those was GHG emission reductions, and we were going through the process John talked about to set targets, we reported into that board level committee there and had to get their heads and hearts on board that setting these targets was the right thing for MTR to do. On climate specifically, we have an annual exercise that looks at our climate risk map, and that goes again through those different levels of reporting. And in line with the ISSB S2, we look in that at both physical risks and also transition risks. Physical risks for us, much easier to imagine. Hot weather can cause rails to buckle. It means that from a heat stroke perspective, our workers need to spend more time resting when they're working on site. So it can impact our assets, but also the progress of some of our new projects. And we also look at things like enhanced rainfall and extreme weather situations. And apparently we now have more lightning strikes in Hong Kong per square meter than we ever used to have, which if you're operating an outdoor railway system with overhead wires means we can have interruption to our power power supplies. So that's on the physical side. On the transition side, we look at policy and regulation change. We look at market and technology shifts. And importantly, look at the reputational risk associated with not taking action on climate change. So we've really tried to fully integrate climate-related and other sustainability-related risks into our enterprise risk management framework.
Yeah, and I think from what I hear, it's really important to have the different reporting lines, especially when you can have a lot of different committees overseeing or responsible for different areas of the work, but ultimately how all these interacting with each other and how all this information feed back to the strategy formulation is really important. So maybe we then turn to Jonathan. So Jonathan is the head of Global Banking Sustainability Asia Pacific at HSBC, and he has been leading HSBC's efforts in sustainable finance in Asia, and also given his role in the Hong Kong Green Finance Association. So I have a question for you, Jonathan, is more from a financier perspective. What advice will you give to other companies in terms of how our listed companies or even other unlisted companies, how they manage the climate risk and opportunities? How do you see from a financier perspective?
Kelly, thank you, and thank you to the Exchange and the Academy for inviting me to this important conversation today. Maybe to start, an observation to sort of set the scene to answer your question. I think it's climate-related risks and issues are now so fundamental and important to the buy side, institutional money, commercial banks, or capital allocators that anybody who wants to raise capital needs to do all of those things that you and Teresa set out. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a plan to deliver on that strategy. You have to have metrics to assess your process. You have to have all of those if you want to maintain best access to the capital markets. So that, in a sense, is just one financial practitioner's endorsement, perhaps, of what you were saying, Teresa, as to sort of why it's so important, the why of what ISSB are doing and the why of what the Exchange are doing. So that's why we would encourage all of our clients to be doing that in our role as a financial intermediary. So then your question really is sort of more to sort of the how. Well, how do you encourage, how do you support clients to access that? Well, it is to prepare those plans, and it is to report them and disclose them. And I think when we look at, you asked specifically around sort of climate, and obviously emissions is a key component of that, but there are many other components of a plan to address climate risk. You need to have everything from your baseline numbers. You need to have some historic numbers. You want those numbers across all of the relevant scopes to the extent you can. We'd advise clients to prepare divisional breakdowns if that's where that's relevant for their business. Then I think it's also very important to sort of set out the ambition, where the entity is trying to get to, as both John and Jill describe why it's important to them, what they're trying to achieve, the risks that they're trying to manage. And that really creates this sort of foundation then to then assess the plans to actually deliver on that. So what are the plans to decarbonize? What investments will be made to manage the risks? I think it's also very important in your disclosure to talk about what you've actually done, because it's all very well sort of promising great things and I'm committed to net zero, but what really is very helpful is to see, well, this is what I've done to date. This is the progress I'm making. And then, of course, building on that, the opportunities and the resilience risks and so forth. I won't repeat what you've said. So I think that's crucial. And to sort of link that back to some of the earlier comments in your questions around management plans, of course, when it's a very long time ago that treasurers could sort of raise capital just by talking about the numbers with their IR teams. That went decades ago. You now have to talk about the business if you want to communicate with your financial partners. And the climate piece is now to bring that climate piece right to the fore in that conversation. And that means it puts a role for for management, not just sort of setting the tone from the top, setting the expectations, confirming it does matter to the corporation, but also for management to facilitate the bottom-up approach, to encourage and enable all of the members of staff, as John was talking about, to contribute, to play their part, make those small gains that will aggregate to making a big difference, and also to make sure that there's sort of connection across between the businesses. And you put it very well, Kelly. I mean, it's not just about finance. You've got to have the projects team in there. You know, you need to have got the sustainability team who can bring particular pieces of expertise. You've got HR bringing, you know, how it's embedded in training programs. And I think management has a critical role in making sure that those sort of any of those sort of silos don't persist, so that the information flows and the connections are made. And we see that very directly, for example, in the labeled finance market, where one of the benefits of that product is actually it forces those connections. If you're going to go out there and raise labeled debt, then your finance team, your treasury team needs to understand the project team, what they're doing, what it will deliver, why it's green, be involved in the reporting, be responsible for the reporting back to investors. So huge role for management.
That's helpful. So after the governance or oversight bit or the board's involvement, I would like to turn our focus to another area more about the disclosures. So apparently the ISSB or our proposals are all focusing or targeting towards more comparable, consistent information for the use of investors, stakeholders. And Jill, maybe, depending on, we always hear a lot of comments from our listed companies that they come from different industry sector, they have different locations of operations, so their risks are obviously different, right? So how would you identify in MTR your climate-related risk and opportunities that maybe about your railway or your property assets in Hong Kong? And in particular, how do you think the use of climate-related scenario analysis help you guys to help to evaluate or assess your climate resilience of your operations?
Sure, and I think to some degree you've hit the nail on the head there, talking about scenario analysis. So at MTR we have a three-pronged climate strategy, one prong being to continue to be a low-carbon public transport provider, the second prong being to reduce our emissions, and the third prong being adaptation and resilience or mitigation, which is where the scenario planning really comes in. So we've carried out for years, it used to be on a 5-yearly basis, but more recently every 3 years because of the changes in climate, extreme weather and climate change impact studies, which is really getting an external consultant to come and have a look at our different sites, to assess their current condition, to assess our current mitigation measures that we have in place, and any asset enhancement programs that we already have in place, and then to advise us on what additional mitigation measures we might take. And those could be everything from looking at our design standards manual. So you'll notice when you go into most MTR stations, you walk up steps, which is for flood protection. But we also have to look at nearby premises as well, because we look at overseas incidents, and you may remember a couple of years ago, there was a very severe flooding incident in the metro in Zhengzhou in the mainland. That was actually caused not by anything that the metro company did, but it was a nearby reservoir that overflowed its banks, and then the water flowed down into the station. So we look at flood protection measures as well. And then really importantly, we also look at our procedures and our processes that our staff would follow. Because if you have an unfortunate incident such as that, the ability of your staff to know what decisions to take and to be able to take them on a timely basis is really incredibly important. And then last year, we've sort of dipped our toe into what I'd call more formal scenario analysis. So looking in accordance with the IPCC guidance at 3 different climate change scenarios over 3 time horizons, so 2030, 2050, and 2021. And we assessed under this exercise 320 sites across Hong Kong, both of our railway network and our property business, to try and find the ones that really pose the highest risk. And interestingly, one of the biggest challenges we have because of the geography of Hong Kong is obviously the coordinates you select in a particular site are incredibly sensitive. Because if you have a site like 𝗙𝗵𝗄, which maybe has an area that's down close to the sea level, but then it goes up the mountain at the back, depending on where you set your coordinates will depend on how high risk a particular site comes out. So we had to have then the kind of human overlay of this data to say, does this feel right? You know, are we missing anything here that we were conscious of was a particular risk? And so what that's then done is enable us to identify our sort of 8 to 10 most high-risk sites that we can then carry out further analysis and decide whether we need to take further mitigation measures. And the other area we're looking at, not so much from a sort of strict scenario analysis perspective, but is our future construction projects here in Hong Kong. And when we went to, a story that kind of illustrates the point, when we went to Europe late last year to place the insurance for our future capital works projects, the first question all of the insurance companies asked us was about flood protection of our construction sites. And one of the insurers said something that's really kind of stuck with me ever since. He said, you know, when you're traditionally considering risk, you look at likelihood and consequence. And we used to talk about a 1 in a 100-year storm, a 1 in a 200-year flood. You know, and increasingly from a climate perspective, we're seeing these events happen year on, year out. So, you know, we're having to really broaden our minds and think about this scenario analysis, not just for our existing assets, but also as we expand our network in the future.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that is a very good demonstration of how the investors' ask is being changing or evolving towards all this ask of information. So Jonathan, I know that HSBC has set this financed emissions target to net zero by 2050. So could you share with us how HSBC measures and evaluates all these progress towards the targets? I think financed emissions is quite a challenge for most of the financial institutions. So any experience to share with that on that?
Yes, it's challenging. You're right, Kelly. It's very challenging. I mean, obviously, net zero 2050 financed emissions. It's about a greenhouse gas calculation. Financed emissions, as I think again both you and Teresa clarified, it's for financial institutions. It's Scope 3, Category 15 emissions. It's typically calculated by taking if we look at just in a loan transaction, the lending institution's share of the borrower's emissions. So if you're lending 10 to a company whose enterprise value is 100, you take 10% of that company's emissions as your financed emissions. And what we've done is in our setting our sort of targets, the first thing you have to do is really sort of assess and establish your baseline. So we looked and we started with what we considered to be some of the sort of highest impact, high risk sectors. So the first two sectors that we tackled were the oil and gas sector and the power and utilities sector, because obviously they have the significant users of fossil fuels. So we assessed, calculated or estimated our starting point, our baseline number. In doing that, there are a number of things you have to do. You have to sort of make a whole series of sort of design decisions as to sort of how you're defining the sector. Is it just the upstream part, which is what we're doing for oil and gas? And then what are you, which scopes are you measuring? So for oil and gas, we measure 1, 2, and 3, because of course 3 downstream is very important for oil and gas. That's where most of the emissions are when somebody takes the product, scope 3, category 1, I think, the use of the product, takes the hydrocarbons and burns them. That's where the biggest impact comes. And then another key design decision is, are you going to set your targets or report your baselines and set your targets using, for example, either an absolute number or an emissions intensity number? And for oil and gas, because of the nature of oil and gas and the expectation that ultimately we will need eventually, when we get to zero, we'll need to be using very, very little oil and gas. So we set that target on an absolute basis. That compares to what we did, for example, in the power and utilities sector, where we said it's more appropriate to use an emissions intensity, because we recognize we've got a lot of clients who, as they are shifting their generation mix, will be growing their low carbon renewables as they sort of wind down their higher carbon thermal power projects. So we used an intensity target in there. And we don't, for example, for power and utilities, we just do scope 1 and scope 2, because scope 3 is rather less material in the power and utilities sector than it is in the oil and gas sector, and much more difficult to measure. Data is a big issue. And we do, of course, in setting those, calculating the baselines and as we report against the targets, we are having to use client data. So another reason why we thoroughly endorse the ISSB proposals, because we need good data from our clients to be able to then report our financed emissions. I mean, we are both a data consumer as we take it in and make our evaluations and our allocations based on that, but we're also a data producer and reporter of data to our financial partners. So we need good data there, and there are big gaps, so we have to use sort of proxy measures. And a lot of the work, a lot of the way the methodologies we've used in this come from PCAF. So the Partnership for Carbon Accounting for Financials that we're a member of, and so obviously they're developing guidance for financial institutions on how to calculate, how to report, and also they do a lot of work in helping with this tricky area of using proxies to sort of fill in the gaps, as it were. So that's what we've done. Then perhaps the final thing I'll just comment on is just how do we set the targets? What does this line look like? So we've used, for our target setting, we've used one of the scenarios prepared by the International Energy Association, and what they call the net zero, or NZE scenario, which is a very ambitious scenario. It looks at what needs to happen to emissions if we're to stay below 1.5 degrees without any overshoot and without using material negative carbon technologies, either technological sequestration solutions or without relying on a big sort of natural sequestration solution. So in a sense, that's very ambitious. We've set the bar very high, and that has consequences, of course. But that sort of defines the shape of the curve, which we will then track our business against. And we now, in trying to sort of implement and drive towards that, when we obviously measure where we are periodically, but we also now measure the financed emissions impact of transactions at the point of origination. And at the moment, we're measuring the impact, and if the impact of those is likely to take us, either consume a lot of our sort of existing headroom or take us materially off target, then we have a whole series of sort of review process that we would undertake to assess how we would then make a decision or build that into the decision making around whether we do that transaction or not. And at some point, I suspect in the future, we'll go beyond that and we'll start to thinking about sort of pricing and optimizing returns on financed emissions, but that's not quite in the models yet. So that's sort of where we are. And sector-wise, yes, we've done oil and gas, we've done power and utilities. We published those baselines and targets last year, so in early 22, and then with the annual report and accounts this year, we published for 4 more sectors. So we have a sort of a conglomerated metal sector, we have for cement, we have for autos, and we have for shipping. And then we've got more sectors that'll be coming up next year. So we're sort of working towards getting through most of the book as soon as we can, Kelly.
Right? So we get started from somewhere anyways. So I think Jonathan already mentioned some of the difficulties in regards Scope 3 emissions reporting, and Hang Lung, I think you guys have already started to embark on this Scope 3 reporting. So could you please share with us any challenges that Hang Lung first encounter when you start this journey, and how you overcome all these, and I think most importantly is how you utilize all these data eventually, how they feed in or help with your business strategy formulation, how you make use of all these data.
Yes, sure. So Scope 3 is a challenge for everyone. By definition, it's our indirect emissions. So as a business, any business, we're not going to think as much about our indirect emissions as our direct emissions. And we need to think about how to collect this information. I mean, to begin with, the first challenge that any company is facing is, which of these 15 categories apply to me? And there's no template. I mean, there are examples of peer reporting, but people have to go through this process. I would reiterate what you've said, what Teresa said. What's important is to just get started. This is also what the Carbon Disclosure Project talks about. Get started and be prepared to iterate. So I think sometimes there's a hesitation to get started because of concerns about imperfect data. There will be imperfect data, but the point is that you will gain insight from that first iteration, and then you will figure out how to improve on that data the second time around. Now, the other thing that, the other challenge that your company will face and that we face is around stakeholder engagement, which people talked about. There are lots of different stakeholders that are involved in the collection of data. Even within, for example, our finance department, there are different business units, and it's unclear sometimes who's the owner of the data that's required. So that's another challenge. But I think once you start on the journey, the opportunity is to get a better understanding of the material hotspots for your business. So until a few years ago, I think we were only reporting on business travel because it was the only data we had available on Scope 3. Business travel and employee commuting together represent just over 1% of our total Scope 3 emissions. So, you know, it's good to encourage people from a cultural building point of view to be mindful of travel and to take the MTR. But that encouragement is not going to drive at the core reductions needed in our Scope 3. And so for real estate, the fundamental hotspots are around embodied carbon and tenant emissions. And we know that now because we've taken inventory of all of our emissions. So I think the need, but also the opportunity for a business is to understand what your hotspots are. And coming back to the comparability point, the need and opportunity is we can all make assumptions that other companies in our sectors are going to be doing this kind of assessment, and they're going to be reporting into the banks what their material areas for Scope 3 are. And so the opportunity and need is to understand what's material for your business and then get to work engaging the relevant stakeholders so that you can make improvements in those areas. And opportunities may emerge from that. So for example, with us, we're looking upstream to our suppliers, and we're quite interested in what our suppliers may be able to do with low carbon innovation. And to begin with, we're taking really, frankly, baby steps in terms of lower carbon materials, but we're hoping those can be scaled over time. We're trying to send that signal of innovation, and we want the people in our malls and our properties to understand that we're working on that. We also want to work with our tenants on emissions reduction. And this is an opportunity, again, because our tenants have their own emissions reduction targets, and they're interested in the footprint of the malls that they're in. And if we can work together on that, now you start to align this environmental issue with the core of the business, which is revenue generation from tenants. So the hope is that over time, if we can be more effective at reducing tenant emissions, which is our second largest scope of Scope 3 emissions, that might be a reason for our tenants to reinforce their loyalty to us, to stay in our mall, which goes to the enterprise value and long-term viability of the business. So Scope 3, at first when you approach it, it might seem like, again, something quite indirect, but I think we can make the assumption that peers in whatever sector we're in are going to be accounting for this properly, that we will be over time compared to our peers, and will be expected to articulate how our ability to work on these emissions reductions will impact on our business going forward. So those are some thoughts, but I just want to check my notes because I had one or two other things I think I wanted to say about Scope 3 as well. The other thing that is going to be challenging for people is data verification. And I think, again, there's a need to use some judgment there. And I would also encourage people to look at peers that are doing relatively good practice. There was a comment earlier from Teresa about norm creation. I think this is actually a very positive thing. So we look with interest in what our peers are reporting every year, which is what the Hong Kong Exchange wants, I think, right? And so if our peers do a particularly good job with some aspect of reporting, we can learn from that and vice versa. And so for companies that are less resourced, they can look at companies that are doing more robust reporting, get a sense of methodologies and how to build on that. And therefore, even if they have less resources, they can get started on the journey by comparison. And I think that process of reporting and trying to do better, I think we should all think of it as a race to excellence. We're in a race against time. And so we should be trying to outdo one another in a positive sense of doing a better job around tackling and understanding of Scope 3, but also then figuring out how to reduce our Scope 3 emissions.
Thank you. So we have a lot of interesting questions coming in. So I think the first one is for Jonathan. With the newly launched ISSB standards and also our proposals going forward, hopefully we will have enhanced ESG information, or especially around climate disclosures. So how could HSBC as a financier make use of all these enhanced and standardized information?
Well, I think fundamentally it's critical to the process by which we make allocations. And as I started to describe earlier, I mean, we look at pretty much all of the data that is available that falls under the categories that ISSB covers when we assess a client using a whole series of tools. We have sort of ESG scoring tools that we're operating now. For our larger clients, we do formalized, bespoke sort of transition plan assessments, and that data is all critical to that. So we have a sort of a common platform that we use to sort of draw in that data. So obviously what we use to gather there, the information sources that we use there are critical. We have so many clients that actually having the ability for those sorts of data gathering to be pre-populated before it comes to, for example, the banker or the relationship manager is massively important. So, you know, ISSB efforts around your taxonomies, your reporting taxonomies is crucial, so that, you know, the models or the data search engines will pull that data into those plans, so that when we can move to the evaluation process very quickly. But all of that goes into those, as I say, into those systems, and is forming an increasingly important part of our evaluations of clients, of our assessments of risk, and ultimately determining how we, you know, allocate capital. Now, we also use, we're starting to use in this process, because we've got so much of the non-financial data to process as well, we're starting to use machine reading and AI to start pulling summaries from published documents. So, you know, be careful what you write in your sustainability reports, because there's a bot out there reading it and putting summaries and so forth together. It's just so much data that we have to do that. So I think that's the core. I mean, in its core, it's simple. This is critical data to making allocation decisions, and the better your data, the more reliable, the more data will generally serve to improve the outcome of those scoring models. Because if the data's not there, you'll get defaulted to a low score. And that's very consistent as well with, for example, the way that ESG rating agencies, in their different ways, would approach that. So, yeah, critical. Big supporter of what you're doing, Kelly and Teresa.
Okay, so we have another question on the Scope 3 emissions. So I think this question more John and Jill. So how do you engage your suppliers to disclose or provide the information for your Scope 3 emissions reporting? How do you try to engage or ask them to give you that information? I know that it may be difficult, especially for you, given so many tenants there with you.
It's undoubtedly a challenge. I think particularly in real estate, the challenge is more upstream than downstream. So although I would say in Hong Kong, even the downstream tenant data can be a bit of a challenge. In the mainland, it's easier because we have access directly to that information. So the hope is we can work more with utilities in Hong Kong on that in the future. And then on the upstream side, you know, the steel and cement suppliers, I mean, what we will look at is the spend on our projects and the quantity, and then the supplier may not necessarily know the emissions factor, but we can work with the information that they can give us, and then use some judgment around emissions factor. Over time, again, the hope is that there will be more emissions factors available in China. In some cases, we have to use information from the UK or the United States for emissions factor calculation, or to use some general assumptions or proxy assumptions. But you can work from the information that you have and then add emissions factor to the calculation to get a lot of the information. Over time, we also want to engage more suppliers, again, with best practice examples. So we're actually in discussions with one of our suppliers that has a good steel certification, and we want to see if we can do something with them where they would go a little bit deeper in terms of product level assurance with a third party, And then we want to use this example and show it to other suppliers and say, this is a better practice or approaching best practice, and could we work with you to have something similar? So there's power in pilots, there's power in examples, because once one company has provided the information at a higher level, then it's impossible for other people can't say that it's impossible to provide. Somebody's actually done it. So I would also I would say that, you can use proxies, you can use information that you've got, and then you can also work on pilot examples to get better disclosure and use that to engage other suppliers and ask them to do something similar.
I think the only thing I'd add there is it is a process of engagement. And so not just around Scope 3 emissions, but for example, we've had a huge amount of interest from our suppliers that kind of help us understand ESG, help us with our own ESG reporting journey. And so we've run a couple of seminars over the past couple of years, and we've had over 50 suppliers sign up and sort of stay well beyond the allotted time to ask us questions about things. So I think engaging them through that, engaging them through ESG audits, so going to have a look at their E&S performance and making it clear that you care about that and you're interested, can be kind of ways into then having the Scope 3 conversations.
Okay, so we have a question for Jonathan. How do you deal with the SMEs that might not be so ahead? I think from the financial perspective.
So, look, I think firstly, it has to be a sort of, when we look at how climate's impacting our business, it's a risk-based approach. So there's more sort of effort and focus around the larger clients. I think our work with the SMEs is a different type of support. It's really looking at how SMEs need the financial support to make the investments that will help them to decarbonize. So we have a whole series of sort of tools around information tools, measurement tools to help the SME, assess what's material to them, help them with their reporting, and where they've got identified needs to spend to reduce emissions, then we've got a number of sort of funding programs that will support them with those investments. So they're absolutely not left out. But obviously we have, when we look at the sort of breakdown of, in the context of the big numbers we report, we've got a few very large clients that are making up 90–95% of what we're reporting, and a very long tail amongst our very important SMEs. So it's a sort of a different approach to supporting the needs of the SME.
There's related questions around the unlisted or smaller size companies. I think all our speakers just want to generally get your views on that. Like the exchange's proposals obviously regulating the listed entities, and then for all the unlisted or smaller size companies, they may still focus on the profits, on the bottom line, rather than paying much more attention for the ESG. So what can we do as a responsible citizenship?
Yeah. I think there's work that, as I'll kick off, we can do to outline the benefits of companies to focus on ESG, and actually that basically ESG is good risk management, is a really good place to kind of start that conversation. And I think increasingly, it's not just the regulators that are interested in ESG. Kind of anecdotal evidence says that young people will look at the recruitment page of a company's website and then go to their ESG or their sustainability report. We know that there are questions coming from funders, regardless of the status of a company. And certainly customers are, we see, are not buying products, not using services because they don't see that company kind of fits with their values. So I think, the business case is there for all companies, but a good place to start the conversation is, look, don't overcomplicate this. This is just about good risk management.
I think this comes back to the Scope 3 question, because there are a lot of unlisted and SMEs in the big companies' supply chains. And this is the opportunity, actually, for the SME to provide the low carbon supply and differentiate themselves and improve their position in the supply chain. So I think SMEs are absolutely in this game, and that's certainly why we do the things that we've outlined, because we think it's the right way to support them, as well as to support the overall sort of global ambition of decarbonisation.
Yeah, maybe just add I think, you know, the question in a way is also a question about a theory of change. You know, how do you engage people on change? And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves that the scale of transformation we're talking about is massive. So I think there's different psychological approaches that can be used, you know, sort of nudging people, pointing out opportunities, and there's a lot of upside. But we need to find a way to have a conversation about accelerating really radical transformation. There was discussion earlier about how much the climate is already changing. And I think at a certain point, I'm going to say another word that may not be popular, but I think we also need to think a little bit more about regulation. I think that climate change is a market failure, and we need to internalize the externality. If we don't, I think things will move maybe not at the speed that we'd like them to, but maybe that's not a very popular sentiment in Hong Kong, but I just want to suggest that that may be part of what we need to do in addition to all of the right psychological messaging around this.
I definitely agree. It's not only risk management, also opportunities out there for this SME to gain the business from the listed companies, for example, and also for the listed companies, how we can influence them to embark on this journey together. And also we also play a very important part, like your engagement exercise, how we transfer the skill set, also educate them to build up the whole ecosystem together. So we have one question for all our panelists. From your experience in assessing your climate-related exposures or opportunities or all these reporting, what areas do you think technology can help make the process easier and more effective? Have your firm used any of these AI experience, and what's your feedback so far?
Well, our initial feedback around AI is it's not bad. You can get some pretty decent summaries pulled off of where a client has reports out in the public domain. AI will produce good summaries. I think again this is an incentive for good reporting, because if it's not clear, if it's confused, then you know what you get back is less helpful, and it takes you longer to get confident as why you should continue to back a particular client or put more capital in the direction of that client. But you know, data and the technology that helps to sort of harvest it and process it and deliver it to where it's needed has a huge role to play. I mean, we've made a number of investments as well in that space areas where we think there are going to be some very significant winners amongst those who are out there seeking to deliver and meet this particular market need. So we're backing a number of those, and it's going to be key.
Well, I'd say there's sort of three areas where we think about technology. First of all is the climate technology that is supporting grid decarbonization. I mean, China deserves a lot of credit for what's happening with renewables and electric vehicles. These are two areas where we can be more optimistic, and energy storage. And so this is helping everybody in terms of our dependence on the grid. Then there's property technology specific for real estate. And I want to give a shout out to Undivided Ventures here in Hong Kong that is looking at innovation in real estate, that this kind of innovation is very promising. And there's opportunities. Real estate historically has been very slow to embrace technology innovation, but there's a lot out there that's now emerging. And the third area that is helpful, I think, is around digitization of data. And we are approached almost weekly by people, or at least monthly, offering us different digital platforms and solutions. And our view as well is, I think in the next few years, you're going to see AI develop so rapidly. We don't want to overcommit to something now, but we definitely see the need to move. We still have parts of our data that are in Excel that we want to move to digitized information where you can do good data mining and insight. But we also think in the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see a lot more offerings in the market based on some of these recent breakthroughs.
Completely agree. For us, whether it's on the railway or the property side, technology is going to be critical. Looking at things like building management systems, so collecting, particularly in old shopping malls, the disparate data that the minute is housed in lots of different systems, and bringing that together to then manage the building more efficiently from an energy perspective. On the railway side, innovations around capturing energy as trains break, and then enabling that energy to be converted and put back into the system for kind of future trains. Solar panels on our light rail vehicles. We've just got a license to trial a hydrogen-powered light rail vehicle. So it's going to be absolutely critical.
Okay. So to wrap up our discussion, what would your key takeaway for all our participants here? John?
Well, I think I'd sort of perhaps reinforce the message that if you want to get or maintain good access to capital markets, and of course we're sitting here in the exchange, so we're focused on public markets, build your plan and communicate your plan effectively, and good disclosure is going to support that process of capital raising, and right the way through to the SMEs, a good plan to decarbonize is going to be very important and very positive across all of your stakeholders, whether it's your customers, the communities in which you operate, your suppliers. Good ESG, good climate risk management is critical.
Yeah, I'd say, in each year of reporting, we should put our best available understanding forward at the time. And that's all we can do, with the understanding that it's going to improve again the following year. So don't let the best be the enemy of the good. But also, some of the feedback earlier on reporting suggests there's a credibility problem that we need to address collectively. It's not a viable long-term strategy to have an overly positive message that isn't grounded in reality. The message that's going to be credible is one where a company can link its climate disclosure to its long-term strategy, which is ultimately what it wants to figure out anyway. So it's not just because it's a reporting requirement, it makes sense from a business planning perspective in any case.
So 4 super quick things, if I may. The first is, don't be afraid to get involved in the conversation. I often, although I'm responsible for MTR's ESG strategy, I'm not an environmentalist by background, so I often feel like a fraud, sitting on these panels. And then I remind myself that actually it's business people that need to be having these conversations, and so, I tell myself off and turn up. Secondly, I think is, reporting is important, but actually what's more important is what you're doing. So use these new disclosure requirements to have those conversations, to raise this issue on the agenda at your board. So I think use them as a tool to drive that kind of change. Thirdly, I'd say, goes back to one of the first points John made around the heads and the hearts. How do you get people on board with this? And it's going to be different depending on who you're talking to. And it is a real journey of sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, working out why people might care and then using that to get them on the bus. And fourthly is, reach out to your peers. One of the great things about working in ESG is that people are very happy to share their knowledge, their experience. If I were to say to John today, tell me what you're doing in your shopping malls, there'd be no sense of, well, that's kind of proprietary to us and I'm not going to share. So, use that to your advantage, reach out and let's all learn from each other and drive the journey together.
I totally agree. So reporting is not for the sake of the regulators. It's a way for you to articulate your commitment, your performance for all the investors, for all the stakeholders. And there's no single hero in this journey, and let's all work together and join our hands together to build a better future. And I hope to see you all in the next ESG Academy. Thank you.
Thank you all for the insightful discussion. May I invite Kelly and our panelists to come to the front of the stage and take a group photo. We are now at the end of today's event. Once again, we would like to thank all our speakers and participants for joining this event. We hope today's discussion has provided you with some practical tips that you can take back to your businesses. We look forward to seeing you at the next ESG Academy seminar. Thank you and have a good afternoon.